B.R. Ambedkar in particular, played an important role in arguing for a much more centralized notion of federalism. So in a sense, in 1950, when we adopted our constitution, we were looking to what many scholars have described as a quasi-federal structure, or a federalism with very strong centripetal tendencies, which is why the center plays an enormously critical role in India's federalism, unique compared to anywhere else in the world. So let's start with that. Were we, in 1950, committing ourselves to a genuinely federal India? And if so, what was the nature of that federalism that we may or may not have lost today? Shashi, may I start with you?
Sure, Yamini. We're very happy to defer to our home state here. Though I suspect on this, most of us are on the same page. As far as 1950 is concerned, no, I think quasi-federal is absolutely the right answer, because what they felt was that you needed, on the one hand, to keep the country together. Don't forget, we just emerged from a terrible, violent partition. There were still the princely states that had very recently been brought into the Union. So there was very much this somewhat centralizing tendency reflected in the preoccupations of people like Nehru and Ambedkar, who wanted to keep the country united. Sardar Patel, for example, retaining the civil services as the steel frame of the unitary system. But at the same time, there is a curious ambivalence, because there's language like India being a union of states. Because after all, in the US, it literally was a union of states. The states pre-existed and came together to create the union. But in our case, the union came first, and the union still has the constitutional right to create states, as we've seen with the creations of some of the more recent states in the last 25 years. So you've got a very interesting ambivalence, but that ambivalence need not be problematic if there is a fair balance. The overall objective ought to be that everybody, wherever they are in India, should feel they have an equal stake in the survival and success of our country. And federalism is a means of ensuring that. The problem has been that the attempts that were made to maintain that have sadly declined or been diluted over the years. We have seen, for example, a situation where the proportion of resources that the center transfers to the states has significantly declined. Central revenues have gone up. I think PTR and KTR can speak to this more than the other, Mr. Reddy, the finance ministers can speak to this better. But this has become a genuine challenge, and therefore the capacity, the ability of the states to balance the overweening authority of the center has been called into question like never before in the last decade or so. That, I think, is where the question of the spirit of federalism comes up. There was a balance. Has that balance been lost?
Thank you. So there was a balance, and in that balance, the center certainly played a crucial role, particularly, as you say, in the ability to form states. KTR, may I come to you first to ask you to reflect on precisely this? Before we get into what we are losing, to understand what was the nature of that balance, because the center played a very crucial role in actually creating, or continues, in fact, by virtue of its constitutional powers, in shaping the nature of the formation of states. So, you know, in your imagination of what federalism is as articulated in the Constitution, what is the role of the center in that framing?
Thank you, Yamini. Firstly, thanks to Vasu and team of South First for having us here. I think it's an honor to, be on this panel. I've had the good fortune of meeting Tyaga for the first time. Good seeing you. Going to the question that you asked, I think the reference that you made with respect to Constituent Assembly debates, I think Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, just to quote him, because I don't want to get it wrong, he had very famously said, these provisions with respect to defining India as a union of the states make the Indian Constitution both unitary as well as federal, according to the requirements of time and circumstances. In normal times, it is framed to work as a federal system, but in times of war, some sort of an emergency or an exigency, it is so designed as to make it work as though it was a unitary system. So the fact is, India, without a question, as enshrined in the Constitution, is a federal republic. But the efforts that are being made over the last few decades, I'll not name names, but I'd definitely say both the union governments, whoever it was, have made consistent efforts to centralize power, have made deliberate attempts to ensure that union of states eventually sort of becomes a unitary state. And that is reflected in so many things. In fact, a classic example, as we sit here and speak on the 17th of September 2022, we've had an invasion of sorts in Hyderabad today. In fact, 17th of September 1948 is the day when Hyderabad became part of Indian Union. We integrated into Indian Union. This was exactly 74 years ago. Now, there are different interpretations, different versions. You know, some people would like to call it liberation, somebody else calls it integration. But the fact is, Hyderabad, the princely state of Hyderabad, became part of Indian Union. Now, if you wanted to celebrate an occasion like this, if you wanted to commemorate an occasion like this, what should the union government do? You should talk to the state government. You should discuss with us. You should seek our opinion. Because after all, we are a democracy. You know, irrespective of our political ideologies, affiliations, we need to talk to each other. We need to consult with each other. And this is not a political party one-upmanship. This is not a BJP versus TRS. This is the union government versus the state government. So when the state government had its difference of opinion, today, in fact, like I said, we had an invasion of sorts. We have the union home minister here, along with 2 other chief ministers and a couple of other cabinet ministers, who are doing a parallel program to what the state government has envisioned and what the state government has planned. Now, this kind of conflicting message that is being given out by way of competing, claims on the same occasion is what is wrong with the federal structure of India today. Just to give you an example, I can quote a number of other things that are wrong, but since this happened this morning, so that's why, in fact, I feel there was a time right after independence where we had a union home minister who would actually flew down to Hyderabad to unite and integrate Hyderabad into Indian Union. Today we have a home minister after 74 years who flew down, who's trying to divide us and bully us, literally bully us into submission of sorts, wanting to subscribe to their ideology, wanting to just adhere to whatever they say, wanting to literally dictate terms to us, which is not acceptable. After all, we are the world's largest democracy, and this sort of, I am superior to you and you are subservient to me kind of an attitude is not something that I think was enshrined or was envisioned by the drafters of our Constitution.
Thank you. I think you make 2 very, very crucial points that I hope we can come back to through the course of the conversation. One, on the importance of deliberation as holding the key to maintaining the character of the federal principle. And second, the question of equity. The first among equals, or is there something above as the union and then states come below, which I hope we can discuss in greater detail. PTR, can I come to you to ask you this? On the nature of the fiscal architecture, the Constitution has been often characterized as imagining a relatively centralized fiscal architecture. Some call it the 1/3, 2/3 problem, in that the bulk of fiscal monetary powers rest with the union, but the bulk of expenditure powers rest with the states, creating, in ideal world, conditions for cooperation, but in not so ideal worlds, conditions for dependency of states on the center. How do you interpret the Constitution's framing of the fiscal architecture for India?
First of all, thanks for inviting me and having me be part of this wonderful panel. Look, I think I'll just step back a little bit. I think at the heart of the notion of federalism is some component of every person's desire for self-determination and a place at the table where big decisions are made. I mean, that's really what federalism is all about. Nobody should be dictating my outcome without my input in the system, right? And you look at it state to union, or you look at it state to village. It's this notion that in a democracy, there should be some participation and right to self-determination. Also, I think, as KTR pointed out, Ambedkar itself saw this as a function of time. If you look around the world, with economic progress, with increase in population, with increased education levels, you will see greater and greater devolution of power. You will see greater and greater, kind of flow down of decision making, because you get decision making closer to the people. That has 1,000 advantages, but that's how the rest of the world has gone. We started in a very unusual place, as many have pointed out. The words were there, but the design or the intention was not actually evident. I guess we could have gone the way of most of the world and started to see more devolution, more self-determination. In fact, we have seen the exact opposite, particularly in the fiscal space. Almost all direct taxation is with the union. That's very unique in the world. No other country has that much control. If you don't have any input into direct taxation, that means you don't have any right to determine whether you should be a progressive taxation regime or a regressive. All we get to do, at least we used to get to do, was set the sales taxes and the point of sale taxes and the regressive indirect taxes. Now even that we've sacrificed for the GST. So effectively, we have almost no control in the nature of revenue raising for the country. Are we really a socialist country? Are we really taking taxes from those who can afford to pay and using it to provide public goods and services and supporting those who have fallen behind? We don't have an adequate say into that system, number one. Number two, it used to be that 2/3 of the spending was directed by the states, maybe, I don't know. Right now, that's not true, because the way the union government diverts things into cesses and surcharges and then names all these schemes, PM this and, something, and then they say we do partial funding the first year, and then they shift the funding to us the second year, and by the fourth year, we still have to call it PM something, but 100% of the funds come from us. So if you look at the percentage of devolution that comes through share of taxes compared to what comes through grants and schemes decided by the center, and increasingly in this regime, named after one individual in the center, then we have lost that independence or that self-determination or that participation as well. So in every way, from a fiscal perspective, from revenue raising, 90% now with the GST Council there. And with spending increasingly there, even though we are the administrators of that spending, they get to design how it should get done, then they get to ask for all kinds of data, then they get to say, no, you qualify, don't qualify. So I would say India started in the wrong place in terms of federalism and has regressed aggressively in the last 8 years or so.
We started in the wrong place and we have regressed. May I ask you, Ms. Reddy, for your view on that provocation, but also there was a third element to India's federal imagination, which was the local governments. In our constitution in 1950, we placed that into the directive principles, and it took all the way till the early 1990s and a constitutional amendment for them to be formally recognized as part of India's federal architecture. Did we, constitutionally, was that a mistake? Did we wait too long to recognize local governments and place them firmly within the architecture of our federal structure?
Yeah, first of all, thanks to the organizers and the founders of South First, Mr. Vasu and all the other founders, and also all the respected colleagues in the panel today. Well, coming to that, Yamini, I think you're very right in saying that it was delayed sizably, and then even after the delay, the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments that came in order to rectify that delay to some extent also did not actually materialize. Normally, there are two ways. One, the requirement of various areas or territories to come together and be one in order to have a common cause or protection or a common future, etc. The other is to hold territories by way of having a country or a republic. India actually became a union in peculiar circumstances, which with a long history and various happenings. So the aspirations of the people of this country at that point of time when we got independence would be quite different from what the generation of today actually see or perceive. The local bodies should have been strengthened and should have been firmly in place right from day one. Because of the delay and because of it not happening, gradually over a period of time, there arose some sort of a blurredness between the relationship between center and state. Now states are complaining about the federal structure that includes autonomy, that includes fiscal matters. But how much are the states actually looking into the local bodies? How many states actually have empowered Zilla Parishads? How many states actually have empowered the Mandal Parishads or the Taluks? How many states have actually empowered the Panchayats? So sometimes what we do, we get in return. So I feel that this structure, federal structure, if implemented in spirit and objective right to the level of Gram Panchayat, will actually over a period of time stop this change of policy or change of objective which actually was envisaged by the authors of our constitution.
Thank you. I hope we can discuss. We have 3 different states here and Kerala. So 4. So I hope we can also look at the differences in local government participation across the different states too, which is such a unique characteristic of our federal structure as well. But let me pick up on this question of, so maybe in 1950 it was somewhat regressive, or at least at any rate there was an imagination of a relatively strong center. But if you look at the arc of independent India, especially after single party dominance of Congress starts breaking, democracy gives you a great vibrancy of federalism. So to Ambedkar's imagination of us moving from unitary to federalism, regional parties start playing a really important role in our national politics as well. Yet, the puzzle that has always been on my mind, why is it in those peak years of very vibrant, in fact, at some point, political scientists would argue that national elections in India are in fact state elections, because it's this coming together of states that is forming the coalitions on in Delhi. Yet very little was done to shift this initial architecture. Shashi, what is your view on that?
Well, I think that a lot depends on how the government of the center runs the country. And I think with the exception of a brief period in the 90s, when there was even talk of the states owning Delhi, when the government was essentially comprised largely of regional parties, you do have parties with a so-called national vision in power in Delhi who tend to ride roughshod over the rights and sensibilities of states. I mean, a very good example was as recently as the proclamation of the lockdown for COVID, where though the states would have to implement that lockdown, they were not consulted. It was a decision announced by the Prime Minister on television sort of 3 hours before it needed to be implemented. And it was done using a rather obscure article of the National Disaster Management Act. But that was the end of any pretense of federal authority on this. It was just as when Mrs. Gandhi proclaimed the emergency in '75, the states sort of woke up to the news. The same thing happened with the COVID lockdown. And you see this time and time again, even since PTR was talking about fiscal allocations. Look at the allocations for to the states from the Disaster Management Fund. When COVID came along, you'll see no relationship between the population of the states, their COVID burden, the number of migrants they had to deal with, and the amount of money that that fund decided to allocate to them. So we're seeing time after time the tendency of those in power in Delhi, using, of course, the argument of the national vision to take those decisions. I do take the point that you and Mr. Reddy have made about the local governments. I think Kerala is an honorable exception in many ways, in that local governments have been empowered to a very great extent, and that you're seeing some genuine devolution of authority, though not yet budgetary, not yet adequate budgetary means, but it's still better than most other states that I'm aware of. And that is an anomaly in all this, because if the states can argue that they are being wrongly treated by the center, the districts can argue they're being wrongly treated by the states. Having said that, the states have a good excuse nowadays, which is that the money they're getting from the center hasn't gone up. It's very interesting when you saw the 14th Finance Commission recommending a significant increase in the proportion of taxes that should be paid to the states. Promptly, the central government implemented that and then reduced instead the amount of other tax they could hold on to. So the net result was a wash. I mean, the states didn't get a penny more, though the argument was they needed more money that they could have the discretion to spend. So there's no question that, I mean, as PTR has argued, that you are seeing a heavy tilting of the scales towards the union government, and that's become more pronounced, it seems to me, in recent years.
So you mentioned the 14th Finance Commission, and it was, I think, in more ways than one, a watershed moment for fiscal federalism in India by virtue of the attempt to enhance devolution to states. But about that time, colleagues and I were spending a fair amount of time talking to line ministries and bureaucrats within states. And one of the things that struck us a lot in those conversations is how much, at least the bureaucracy and the line departments, were unhappy because what the center did was, having done the devolution, it reduced the allocations to several centrally sponsored schemes. Now, centrally sponsored schemes have been the bane of most state governments since the 1960s. I think commission after commission after commission has complained about centrally sponsored schemes, and attempts have been made every now and again to reduce the number of centrally sponsored schemes from 500 to 120, then goes back to 200. Now apparently it's 28, but it's actually about 150. And if you look at the DBT database, there's 400 schemes that the government of India has for which money is flowing. So these abound everywhere, and state governments complain a lot. But I was struck, and this is an open question to any one of you who would want to pick this up to answer, why it is that, at least in the bureaucracy, at that particular moment, there was great annoyance about the reduction of centrally sponsored schemes. In fact, it felt like we had just turned the clock to say, don't take those back, give them back to us all over again, line department after line department, not finance departments, though, and I'll come to that in a minute. But what is it about the tensions of these centrally sponsored schemes? They've always been there. Politically, it's always been a source of complaining. But whenever they get reduced, the argument is for more.
I think Shashi lives in Delhi. He should take this. He has more interaction with bureaucrats.
The three of you have full rights to answer that.
Let me just quickly jump in. You know, I think when Shashi was speaking, I was thinking of how India has really become, you know, as Tyaga said, I think over a period of time, it has really regressed, and the spirit of federalism really it has come to a situation where now everything is centered around people and personalities. You know, there was a time, with all due respect, when somebody famously said, India is Indira and Indira is India. You know, the whole personality cult thing. Now, something very similar, but even more, possibly more drastic, you know, where stadiums are being renamed, where medical colleges are being renamed, and I'm guessing if the Union Finance Minister has a way, I think the new currency notes also will have, you know, the Prime Minister's image. Possibly they'll even replace Mahatma Gandhi's image. I have no doubt in my mind. Because, you know, we have a situation where it's funny, embarrassing, and also sometimes upsetting. We've had the Union Finance Minister here recently, a couple of weeks ago. She went to a fair price shop in a district about 100 kilometers from here. And she was making a scene out there like a street-level BJP worker, asking the collector, right in front of about 200 people, as to where the Prime Minister's photo in the fair price shop was. Now, the point I'm trying to make is, if we are truly a federal republic, as we are supposed to be, why are we fighting over an individual's pictures and in the institutions that we've built at the grassroots level? I mean, if I can certainly counter it and say, you know, when Modi ji was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, did he put up Dr. Manmohan Singh's pictures in all the fair price shops in Gujarat? I don't think so. The point I'm trying to make is, none of our enactments, none of our legislations actually mandate this kind of cult worship. What has essentially happened, Yamini, in my humble opinion, is, while we are called the world's largest parliamentary democracy, we function like a presidential democracy and not like a parliamentary democracy. Essentially, everything being centralized. And this applies to states as well, by the way. I'm not saying this only about the union government. I'm also saying the same thing about state government. Even the states, as Rajendra said, we do also, in fact, barring Kerala probably, I think we do not empower our local governments enough. We don't empower our local governments enough. So, yes, what you do is sometimes what you get. Karma is a boomerang, like they say. But the point is, we need to, at some point, draw lines, clear distinctions, and say, okay, now let's define our roles. The defense, railways, and there are certain areas we have simply no role. That should be left to the union government. And what is the union government doing today with respect to NREGA? They want to deposit funds from the NREGA kitty directly into the workers' account in a village. Now, do the states not get to decide what sort of work needs to be taken up? Kerala may have done some things. Telangana may have done some things. Tamil Nadu would want to do something else. And Andhra might be wanting to do something else. We are all on different stages of learning curve. Now, this is the essence of federalism, trying to ensure that we understand stronger the states are, stronger the country is going to be. Each state needs to align its priorities in tandem with its local governments. In Telangana, we run a program called as Palle Pragati and Pattan Pragati. Today, when Government of India is rated the top 20 best villages in the country, 19 are from Telangana because of this program. The point I'm trying to make is, when we are operating with a focus and when we are trying to up our game, all the union government needs to do is encourage performers and leave it to us to decide what central sponsored scheme that we need to participate in and what we can opt out of. If that sort of flexibility is given to us, as opposed to thrusting things down our throat, I think then we truly will become a strong nation, and as Prime Minister calls it, Amrut Kal, and Achhe Din will come fairly quickly.
Flexibility in centrally sponsored schemes, PTR, do you think that's part of the menu of solutions to reimagining the federal compact?
Yeah, I'm not even clear why we should have centrally sponsored schemes as opposed to giving the money to the people, right? I have a video clip picking up from my friend of then Chief Minister of Gujarat, Thiru Narendra Modi, going on a long exposition. It's in Hindi. I can play it here if you want. Yeah, he says, the states have been feeding the poor for decades. All of a sudden, the union comes and says, this is coming from me. What does that mean? All these things, right? So I think there are some clear roles for the union. Foreign affairs, defense, currency stabilization, trade, policies. But when it comes to what is right, I mean, you and I have talked about this before. You've seen so many CAG reports, not our reports, CAG reports that talk about Swachh Bharat scheme toilets built with no water because the union government cannot supply water, only the local body can supply water. Or funds sent and not used because you cannot whitewash a thatched school. Right? And, this notion that somehow you can direct or dictate policy. And then the question then is, what is the intent? Is it to create a kind of cult? Is it to, we have an insurance program, or for that matter, PDS. In all of these things, Tamil Nadu was certainly ahead of the Indian average or the design of the union scheme. Then they design a scheme, and then they say, you have to change the name. If you want some share of it to be funded by the union, you have to change the name. We have an insurance program. They want to partly fund some of it. They say you have to put the Prime Minister's image on the card, on the ID card. I mean, we were already doing it before. Now, you get some. So, and I'll go even to the extreme in terms of schemes, right? Like they have the scheme called Jal Jeevan scheme, right? And it started out with, 60 or 80-20, then 60-40, then 40-60, the usual model sliding scale. But they incentivize you to actually take the tap into every house in every village. Now, in a lot of cases, the villagers don't want the tap in their house. They have their own, mores and their own psychology about it. They want a public tap on the street. In my constituency, in colonies where I've offered to run taps into the house, they say, no, leave the tap outside my house, not inside my house. But the scheme says you only get funding if you take the tap inside the house. Right? This last mile delivery, why should there be a standardized model coming from Delhi about last mile delivery? Different people have different preferences. That's what the states exist for. That's what the local bodies exist for. Now, as far as the local bodies, I definitely take my friend's comment because, he has, unlike me, he has served as a sarpanch at a local body level. I completely agree with the lack of devolution. But it's a double-edged sword. In the case of Tamil Nadu, a lot of our problems with local bodies have to do with the caste problem. And it has to do with no matter what you do about reservations and all that. Once you get to a granular level where within the same geographical area, you reserve this as let's say, a SC seat, but there is a whole lot of non-SC people there. you start having caste problems, and there's been violence and murders and all kinds of clashes and stuff like that. So my colleague, also the Minister for Planning, my colleague, the Vice Chairman of the Planning Commission of Tamil Nadu, says the single biggest improvement in delivery of services and the equality of society in the rural areas of Tamil Nadu was when the line department started driving the programs rather than the local body elected officials. Because if they did that, it was very biased, and even letting out the temple lands and managing the tanks and all that, they would do on a caste basis or a communal basis or a religion basis or something. And once you standardize the model from Chennai, then it became actually better delivery. So I completely agree, you can't have it always. You can't say, I want devolution to my level, but not below me. And again, I think time changes things, right? If you have greater education levels, you have greater integration, more harmony, then you do more devolution. And I think some states, and maybe there's a correlation between the communist philosophy and the fact that Kerala has such high devolution, maybe. But
I think all parties take equal credit for that.
but you know, some of these things should never be aggregated. There is no natural reason for a one-size-fits-all aggregated model coming from Delhi. That's my idea.
I think one of the big governance challenges for India is that we still haven't passed out what level of government should be performing what level of function, and it leads to a consistent set of overlaps across the board. I was going to pose the next question, but you've thrown such an important provocation about local governments and the local context that I think, Mr. Reddy, you have to answer that. Because if I at the risk of making a too broad a statement out of your somewhat more nuanced point, would it be right to say that the inequalities at the grassroots level should necessitate a little bit more centralization from the state? I'm just throwing this out as a provocation, because I think that's one of the very critical reasons why you could, centralization at the state level has often happened at the cost of deeper devolution to local governments.
These things, Yamini, I feel are very state specific, with in acknowledgement and also due respect to the opinions of my colleagues here. Transgression of responsibilities and duties, overlaps, normally happen vertically. Now, the duty of a local body representative, a sarpanch or a taluk board president is well defined. But the MLA wants to go and see what all is happening, right from laying of drains to roads to water. This is clearly the role of a local body.
And the MP also, with the MP-led fund.
The MP also. And now, MLA is transgressing into the local bodies, Parliament is transgressing into the legislatures, so is the result with regard to local bodies, legislatures and Parliament. Next comes whether there should be a more centralized monitoring and spending. I believe that in a democracy, ultimately, it is the elected representative who should have supreme power. He is elected by the public. If the public do not like his whatever capacities, there is always a provision to replace him when the period ends. But I have in my own experience seen that anybody who is elected by the public have a far better understanding of the needs of the public than anyone else in the system. And now when it comes to the expenditures that are made, now I, belonging to a state as well as to a regional party, at the same time, to be fair and be objective, the money that is being spent by the center for the schemes, central sponsored schemes, are outside of the money that is already devolved to the states. So when the center spends certain amount of money on CASD, centralized state development schemes, or the centrally sponsored schemes. So centrally sponsored schemes are 100% spent by the center, and CASDs are partly spent with contribution by the state. So these are framed in such a way based on the requirement. Now, as Mr. PTR said, There are state-specific, and as Mr. KTR also said, state-specific needs are there where maybe the CAs, DAs have to be, the states have to be given a little more autonomy to design schemes that are more suitable for their requirement. But at the same time, broadly speaking, when the center is spending money for the public, if the state wants to have its own emblem or own mark or trademark, so also we should allow the center to do it.
Okay, can I just interrupt for sorry to interrupt. My point is very simple, very straight. I agree with you, and I don't have a problem with centrally sponsored schemes either. The problem arises when somebody tries to impose their ideology. The issue is not centrally sponsored schemes or the larger good that is aimed at for the betterment of the society. That is not a problem at all. See, between all of us, the southern states, we are 19% of the population of this country, but we contribute to 35% of the GDP of this country. So when somebody from Delhi flies into Hyderabad and tells us that I am the giver and you are the taker, you know the attitude that kicks in, you know that humne aapko 2 lakh crore diya. Now that really puts me off. Because you know, every rupee I contribute from Telangana, my exchequer contributes from Telangana, what we get back is 46 paisa. For every rupee that is contributed from the south of India, 35% of the GDP, we do not get back. I'm not even asking, I'm not even suggesting that I get back every single paisa. I know that there is defense, I know that there is railways, I know that there are laggard states, I know that there are roles that the government of India needs to fulfill, which of course we are happy to contribute, and we are happy to, you know, as an Indian citizen, we are happy to, you know, be a part of the nation building. But the problem is the attitude of those who run Delhi. You know, they come with a chip on their shoulder and they tell us, listen, हम देने वाले हैं, आप लेने वाले हैं. तो इसीलिए हम जब देते हैं, हम जो कहते हैं, whatever we say, you have to do. Now that is the problem, because Andhra has a certain challenge. Andhra has certain, you know, projects that they would like to complete. In Telangana, in the last 8 years, we have completed drinking water connection to each and every home. In fact, that became inspiration to Har Ghar Jal. In Telangana, we have done some very, very focused programs on tank revival. In Telangana, we've also completed some large lift irrigation projects. So I have a different set of priorities from my friends here. Now, why should I not get to decide what I should do with my devolution money and with also my money that is being proposed in centrally sponsored schemes? The last thing I'll say is, you know, this whole myth about devolution, how it has been enhanced by Modi ji. Actually, the fact is, both the finance ministers can tell you, it is not 41% that we receive today. Because of all this cess and other things that is happening, we only get 29%, which is far worse than what it was. So this whole, again, abrogation of sorts of responsibilities, or, you know, this obfuscation that they indulge in, you know, and kind of try and take away the money that rightfully belongs to the states by way of imposing additional excise duties and other things. It is a travesty. So this needs to be challenged. This needs to be addressed. And if needed, it needs to be challenged legally as well.
In fact,
so as Mr. KTR said, the actual increase in devolution and more autonomy to the state happened during the 14th Finance Commission while Dr. Y.V. Reddy was the chairman. Because the 14th Finance Commission felt that states ought to have more autonomy and independence into doing what they want with the money, and it need not be dictated by the center. But unfortunately, that 42 finally now comes down to only about 30%, 10% lesser than what we are entitled to get for various reasons, cesses, etc., etc. But then coming to the issue of center-state, I think this relationship between center, state, federal structure, etc., has to happen from top to bottom. It cannot stop midway or start midway. It has to start from top and go down up to the Gram Panchayat level. Only then everybody understands what the actual responsibilities are, what the actual authorities are, and what the duties are.
Sorry, I just want to say one thing about centrally sponsored schemes. I mean, I'm relatively new in politics, but 15th Finance Commission Chairman, Mr. N.K. Singh, at some seminar we were at, he said there wasn't actually this whole, it wasn't like a constitutional carve-out that there should be centrally sponsored schemes. Certain governments started it. When states benefited, then they still had a say in its design, and it was a participative kind of approach. They didn't object. This regime has just taken it to extremes and made it dictatorial, and, you know, to suit their political needs as opposed to the needs of the people. But it's not like inherent in the constitution that there should be centrally sponsored schemes. It's not like they're particularly well designed to execute anything. I mean, as I think former Chief Minister of then unified Andhra said, the union is a myth, right? It's an integration of all the money that comes from the states, politicians that come from the states, IAS officers that come from the states, IPS officers that come from the states. It is a temporary gathering of people to facilitate the distribution, redistribution, devolution of what comes from the states. It's not like it drops from the sky to the union and then they divide it up to us, right? So this notion that there should be something that they know better than us itself is a flawed notion, right? There's no natural place for them to have this. And I mean, listen, I'm far, far less strident than the former Chief Minister of Gujarat, Narendra Modi, when he said the same things when he was Chief Minister.
Well, when they abolished the Planning Commission, they should have got rid of the centrally sponsored schemes along with it, maybe.
No, but I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that came from that. In fact, when KTR was talking about how much money Telangana gets back on the taxes it pays, historically, the South has been subsidizing the North. There's very little doubt about that. And other states, I remember Mr. Siddaramaiah, when the terms of reference of the 15th Commission, Finance Commission came out, he pointed out that for every 1 rupee of tax contributed by Uttar Pradesh, the state receives 179 back, whereas Karnataka, rather like Telangana today, received 0.47. And he says, how long can you keep incentivizing population growth? Now, this ties into the question of central assistance because it's again striking, and this is not from him, I was doing my own research. Karnataka meets 72% of its expenses from its own state taxes, whereas Bihar meets just 23%. The remaining 77% comes from central allocations. So, unlike most other federal systems, India's revenues go disproportionately to our worst performing states. And those are usually states with poor levels of education, high rates of fertility and population growth. And the South, where these things are done better and there are high performance states by any yardstick, thereby get short shrift, which is actually going to the heart of the issues of federalism. Because if indeed, as a result of the federal system, you're subsidizing the poorer performing states, in principle, no argument. But if the way in which it's done seems to reward lack of performance, population growth resulting from that particular misgovernance in some of these states, and those who are performing well get penalized. In other words, if Kerala runs much better health outcomes and much better educational outcomes, its reward should not be to get less money from the Center for Health and for Education. But that's de facto what's happening. And this remains a serious problem, it seems to me, and goes to the heart of the whole question as to why many of the southern states are talking to you. I do want to join the others in congratulating the organizers for getting these fine minds from the South together. I think I'm the only one from a non-regional party on this panel, but the idea is precisely that it's high time we woke up to the fact that the South has real concerns.
I just have one provocative thought for the finance ministers, and I think for all of us. You know, when we say federal, are we fully federal? Are we truly federal? You know, if you look at the United States, they are also a federal republic. In the United States, you know, this whole question about devolution, you know, collecting taxes and then devolving, as opposed to that, why can't we think and why can't we propose a system where even the income tax, even the corporate tax is actually collected and, you know, deducted at the source? Why should we pay to the center and then go to Delhi and line up each of our finance ministers and, you know, I wouldn't call it a bowl of sorts, but, you know, kind of make a request, plead with them, and then eventually get our money back a few months later? Why can't we actually be a truly, fully federal republic and actually start collecting taxes at the source, including income tax and corporate tax?
To add to that, from a northern perspective, how do you then deal with the fact that growth paths have taken our country?
When I said that, I mean our share of the income tax and corporate tax. I don't mean the whole thing.
So, but I'm just going to throw out one element to this, which is the challenge of inequality. You have such huge convergence, such huge divergence, which all economic theory would have argued over time would have led closer towards convergence. But there's no sign of that convergence, and we still sit within the union. So there has to be equitable sharing. It is a very integrated economy, as we discovered in the times of COVID. The fact that labor and capital moves, it moves from the north to the south, so there is an interdependency. In some senses, it sharpens the federal, it's a sign of a sharpened federal tension, but also a sign of deepened federalism. So how do we balance these two tensions as we go forward in a fairly fraught environment?
Let me take the simple question first, right? I mean, I think certainly we have many examples of societies where income taxes or direct taxes happen at multiple levels. So, both KTR and I lived in the US for many years. The federal government takes some tax, the state government takes some tax, the city of New York takes some tax, the city of Los Angeles takes some tax, right? These are all independent of each other. So certainly at some point we have to say that the power of direct taxation has to be given to the states, whatever the constitutional need for that is. But there's a broader problem here. I think in no federal society are all people the same, right? Like economically, you'll always find better offs and less well-offs. The unique problem of India, and why I said to the 15th Finance Commission in my submission, written submission, I said, if equality and efficiency were the targets of finance commissions, then you all have been miserable failures for 25 years. Because every other society in the world, every other country in the world, the US, China, European Union, wherever, you take funds from the better off, you give it to the less well off, and whatever the measure is, it converges. Longevity, health measures, per capita income, education access. It converges. That's what the transfers are supposed to do. In our case, not only it doesn't converge, not only it doesn't stay the same, not only it's diverging, it's accelerating in its divergence. So the ratio keeps changing again and again, and still the outcome gets worse and worse. Let's just take Tamil Nadu's case. At one point, we were roughly 7.5% of the population, 7.5% of the GDP, got about 7% of the tax devolution of that 32% that they devolved. Now we are less than 6%, I think, of the population, about 10.5% of the GDP, and we get about 4% of the taxes. That means for 25 years, these things have been going the wrong way, and we are not getting convergence. So there's something structurally wrong. And what's structurally wrong is not with us. What's structurally wrong is in those northern states where, despite getting massive devolution, despite getting massive transfers, they are not able to improve the quality of people's lives, the average education access, or the social development indicators or human development indicators. So if your measures on which you allocate, you know the formula for the Finance Commission, some population, some gap to actual, all these forest cover, land and all that. Clearly they're allocating the money on the wrong dimensions because they keep on allocating more money and things keep getting worse. So there's something profoundly wrong in the developmental model of the northern states, particularly the Hindi belt, that unless that is fixed, no matter how much money you transfer, you're not going to be able to fix the problem. You can do politics with it, but you can't improve people's lives unless you find out what that is. And I have written in my submission, one main thing they can fix is empower women, ensure girls stay in school, delay marriages, get them, better health outcomes. And they haven't done that. That's really, even a state like Gujarat that has slightly higher per capita income than Tamil Nadu, 50% or so of the girls around 18 are not in school. That's not true in any southern state, right? So there's something structurally wrong that money can't fix that needs to be fixed some other way. Otherwise, we're just keeping on going the wrong way. No other country, no other union in the world has this bad an outcome.
I completely agree with him on how miserably they have failed in the north. But they come here and lecture us, by the way. You have to admire their temerity. You have to really admire their guts and temerity to come to the south, lecture all of us on how to run our states and how to actually administer, and how miserably we have done vis-a-vis them. When the fact is, all the indicators, no matter what you take, all the human development indices, all the social indicators will show you otherwise.
There is, I think what both of you are saying gets to the heart of the governance issue. And there is a lot to be learned. That's why federalism matters so much from what different states are doing. So the country learned from the midday meals. The country also learned from Bihar's attempt at giving bicycles to girls to try and bring them, get them to secondary schools. And in all of this, I think one aspect that we haven't talked about much is, and you brought it up in your initial remarks, the question of deliberation, that at the heart of federalism is the idea of coming together to dialogue, to deliberate, to share, to learn, and evolve solutions to these very wicked, hard problems. There has been, Mr. Reddy, if you can reflect a little bit on this, constant attempts in our history of trying to create these so-called sites of deliberation. The Interstate Council, which is now punishment posting for the bureaucrat. The Planning Commission, everybody said, was filled with all kinds of problems. The National Development Council did not work, so we created the Niti Aayog. But then we left it to the finance departments, or the Ministry of Finance rather, to do deliberation with states. The GST Council, which was meant to be a site of deliberation, it works sometimes, it doesn't on other occasions. How do we think about this institutional question? Are we missing something? And what kind of space do we need for states to come together? The regional coming together, of course, is full of learning. The southern states coming together, the northeastern states coming together. But there's a lot needed for this deliberative environment to come together. Is it an institutional problem as well as much as it is a political problem?
I think it is both, Yamini. Of late, I think last year and this year together we had two South Zonal Council meetings. I think they were quite well held, and we could see sizable outcome. Of course, I believe for a very long time Zonal Council meetings were not held. But again, coming to the fundamental question is, are we a union or a federation? Now, I know it's very difficult not to be speaking for autonomy, not to be speaking in favor of regionalism or sub-regionalism. Because once you speak about unitary, then it becomes dry. But at the same time, India, is it a federation or is it a union? Even though we have certain elements or quite a lot of importance given to the federal structure, we are basically a unitary country. That is the reason that more of power we have to reconcile and accept. Probably the reasons at that point of time would have been different from many other countries. Now you look at Russia, you look at what's happening in the UK, you look at Spain. See, everywhere you have this sub-regionalism to such an extent that there is a constant friction between the union and the states or the independent units. So for India to be one, there are various issues where we have to be large-hearted and given. Now, for example, I'll take the case of northeastern states. They barely have anything for them. It is the duty of us to support them. So we have to, at some point of time, feel that probably we are more fortunate. And because of us being more fortunate, it becomes incumbent upon us to support all the states that do not have certain or have natural disadvantages. So it becomes difficult when we actually compare ourselves to the West and especially to the United States of America. See, there it is a federation, it's a clear federation. Like Mr. Sheshi said in the beginning and Mr. KTR said in the beginning, it is basically a federation of states that were already there. Whereas we in India, at that point of time when we got independence, the complications were so huge. There were princely states, there were areas that were ruled by the British government, by the crown, and so many diversity in caste, creed, language. There are so many difficulties where unless there is some sort of a strong center and strong integration, it becomes difficult to hold on, I feel personally. Now, it becomes very nice to say that I am Andhraite. But at the same time, unless we say I am Indian first and then Andhraite, it is difficult for this country to survive.
No, I want to make a slight distinction here. It's precisely because I'm Indian that I worry that all the money is being thrown into a well and no development happens in UP. Right? It's not the money that I begrudge. It's that hundreds of millions of fellow citizens are not getting development, are not getting growth, are not getting access. So it is because of patriotism. I'm not saying I don't want to give the money. I'm saying we are, just like KTR said, we are happy to contribute. We are well off. We are lucky. We have been well governed. We are educated. We want to help. But we should get something that helps our fellow citizens. If we keep on transferring the wealth and it keeps on going into, nothingness, into smoke, that's what we are concerned about. How do I say this? If it was just a zero-sum game that says who gets more, who gets less, etc., then it's a pointless debate. Why do we come to public life? We're not, just trying to, it's not like going to a casino and, rolling the dice, right? There should be some future vision of a better tomorrow than today. And that better tomorrow, it is hard to imagine a country where hundreds of millions of people get left behind, and yet there is a better tomorrow. They also must participate in this. And that's a state problem, but the union trying to dictate a one-size-fits-all as the disparity increases is an exercise in futility at best, or some kind of, megalomania at worst.
If I can just add a little bit to this. 42% was the devolution, vertical devolution by the 14th Finance Commission, and 15th Finance Commission actually made it 41. 1% going to the Union Territory of Kashmir. At that point of time, there was a lot of comment on why do we have to give that? But is it right? If we are not coming forward to give that 1% to an territory called Kashmir, on one point of view, you look at it from the state point of view, it might sound to be state advantages to the state. But when you look at it from the country's point of view, is it correct? That's my question.
Go ahead.
I just had one quick point. I've been a minister for 8 years. I've been a minister in the state for 8 years, and Honorable Prime Minister and his team have been in Delhi for the last 8 years. You talked about divergent India. You talked about how India is so different, how heterogeneous it is, how everything is different in northeast, west, east, south, etc. How many times has this government in Delhi made an effort to actually make us sit together? Because Prime Minister keeps talking about Team India. How many times has actually Team India sat together and tried to learn from each other? If Tamil Nadu is doing something very good in health, should I not learn from it? Should I reinvent the wheel? I don't think there has been a single situation where this government in India tried to actually say, listen, there are some good things that have been done in some pockets of the country. Why don't you learn from each other without reinventing the wheel? That has not happened. Second point, they talk about cooperative federalism. I mean, lip service is fine. I mean, it's all nice to hear all these nice, fancy words. The fact is there cooperative federalism in the way they behave, in the way they actually operate? No, it is coercive federalism. That's what they actually, in terms of actions, that's what they actually deliver. Sabka saath, sabka vikas. Seriously? Has it been happening? Has it really happened? I don't think so. In fact, last point I would say, somebody was joking when I was walking in. I was preparing because, there are some very, very sharp minds here. So I figured, I should prepare. And somebody told me, this Prime Minister, for him, GDP is not gross domestic product, but for him, it's only Gujarat Development Program. That's all he knows. That's all he understands. Where is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas in this country? It's all, Gujarat is the epicenter of everything. I'll just give you one example. In Telangana, we had launched what is called as the Hyderabad International Center for Arbitration and Mediation with the help of some legal luminaries. We wanted this to be, we wanted to compete with Singapore, Dubai, London, and we wanted a lot of arbitration disputes to be settled here. The state would gain some revenue, will make it also an attractive place to do business, etc. What should the government of India do in such a case when the state actually launches something on its own? At best, support us financially, give us some backing. At worst, at least don't create something which will be a hurdle. And that's exactly what they've done. They've gone ahead a couple of months later, announced in Gujarat a new center with complete center backing, a new center which runs exactly contrary to us. So the point is, this whole spirit that they talk about, unless it translates into action, this country will never truly be a fully federal republic.
So at heart, it is a political, not an institutional issue.
Yamini, if I can intervene for a minute. Federalism, as I don't have to tell any of you, is not just about the fiscal. It's not just about the. It's not just about the fiscal space, right? As Justice Selmeswar pointed out in the morning session, for example, NEET. How does one common entrance examination work for a country like India? Tamil Nadu is fighting back what it feels imposition of Hindi, right? As representatives from the South, what do you think are the areas where the diversity that this country is known for is sought to be trampled upon?
So I think that question gets to the heart of where I think we should shift gear in this conversation, which is precisely this. The federal principle is also about accommodation. It's about enabling diversity to cohere. And in some senses, at least in the 1950 imagination, the strong center was part of precisely doing this. We've now come a long way from there. In this present moment, how does the centralization that we've all spoken about now sit with this need for accommodation, of the coherence of diversity, of the coherence of difference?
Well, I'm genuinely worried about this because you're looking at a situation where this precise logic that in a country, a union made up of divergent states at various stages of development, of literacy, of various human development indicators, there must be a sense that there is, if you like, the common nationhood that belongs to all of us should be a winning proposition for all of us. But now we're facing, for example, in 2026, just 4 years away, the lapsing of the 91st Amendment, under which the political authority in this country, that is seats in Lok Sabha, were allocated on the basis of the 1971 census, even though it was already 25 years out of date when Mr. Vajpayee renewed it. It was brought in again so that we wouldn't needlessly open up a situation in which the states that were performing well would be punished, as it were, for their performance in terms of reduced population by also losing the political power that comes with higher population. So that this became a rather sensitive situation. I know in democracy, one person, one vote and so on means that as some of our northern states have completely grown out of control in terms of population, they should be entitled to more seats. But the result is going to be a serious disenfranchisement of the southern states. And it's only 4 years away, and I think it's time we start thinking about it. So far we've been discussing money, fiscal allocations, those are real concerns. But what happens in a situation where, particularly with a fairly strong majoritarian party in power at the center, at the union government, which has a Hindustan, Hindutva kind of agenda, how do we then see the southern states in a position in which collectively, for example, the South is unable to even prevent a constitutional amendment? If tomorrow, after 2026, the political representatives of the northern states have a 2/3 majority, what's to prevent them, for example, declaring Hindi as the national language, which many have tried to do, but have always been prevented from? These are also fundamental questions. There's a political dimension to the unitary impulse that I think we will have to confront sooner rather than later because it's just a few years down the road. There's the larger project, of course, we've got a building coming on stream where there's going to be enough seats for 880 people. Are we going to find our parliament being converted into some equivalent of the Chinese People's Consultative Chamber, where Mr. Xi Jinping comes in and makes his declamations and these 880 or whatever 1,000 people there ritually applaud their tables and that's about it in terms of meaningful debate? These are questions that I think it's time we start thinking about, particularly in the South, because the southern states are going to find that one of the rewards for their good economic performance, low levels of fertility of women, empowerment of women, education, and thereby lower population, that one of the rewards for that is going to be a loss of political power in the union. How do we deal with that?
Anyone amongst you wants to comment on
Well, I
this
think
really important point?
we have to collectively start campaigning and actually meeting more often and actually start making the case, because I think Shashi is absolutely right. We have, between all 6 states in the South, right now we have 130 Lok Sabha seats. But if that is going to be reduced by a large number, then I think the voice from the South, which has performed well, and for penalizing a performer, literally incentivizing a non-performer, is a travesty of all, in all forms. So therefore, I think we have to get our act together, cutting across, the various states. I mean, if I say too much, then I'll be called an anti-national. I'll be accused of being a secessionist and wanting a new country in the form of South India, etc. So I don't want to go thus far, but I'd rather say, under the larger rubric of India, I think all of us, like Rajendra said, we're all Indians first. We all love our country more than possibly, the people who run the country right now. But the fact is, yes, back in 1980s, when family planning was a big deal, South performed much, much better than the northern part of India. Now, you cannot penalize us. You cannot actually stifle our voice by way of cutting down the seats. I think we have to get together, cutting across political parties. Maybe in the next couple of months, we'll request our Honorable Chief Minister either to take it up in the Southern Region Council or otherwise. And I think this affects all of us. So the collective voice is something that we
The
have.
need to reimagine our federalism is now becoming very clearly a visible issue on the horizon.
Are there other aspects to this reimagination? There have been 3 issues that make their way into the national debate on a fairly regular basis. And I'd like both of you to reflect on all 3 of these. One is, do we need to go back to the union and state lists and reimagine the allocation of roles and responsibilities, both keeping in mind that there is a lot more integration, so things that states used to do now cut across state borders, so how do we manage that, as well as the fact that the union has taken over sets of roles that constitutionally were at the state level. The second question has been around the role of the institutions, like we talked about a little bit earlier, interstate councils, the absence of a planning commission. And the third issue of reform that comes up repeatedly is representation, not just in the Lok Sabha, but also in the Rajya Sabha, which was in some ways to be a representative of the states and doesn't necessarily play that role anymore. So is there scope, as we reimagine federalism, to also look at these 3 aspects of reform that come up, or is the national debate barking up the wrong tree?
I think whatever we're doing now is not working. There was an article a couple of days ago from Ratin Roy talking about getting larger versus getting richer. I was in Delhi for something, and at some media house, in the course of a discussion, they asked me, "Oh, are you very excited that India has become a larger economy than the UK?" I said, "Not particularly. I mean, if you tell me that the average citizen's life has improved, if they have better access to clean drinking water and, garbage-free street, that excites me. Multiplying some number by some other number and arriving at some scale, it doesn't really excite me that much." He went on to analyze it even more deeply, which is the point I want to make here, right? We have this perception that the labor from the poorer northern states comes and finds work and helps our economy. All true. But he made a point which I had not actually contemplated. Ever since I became the finance minister, I've been chairing the state-level bankers committee meetings every 3 months myself. Credit is such an important component of the economy in a country like India, where you don't have unsecured lending, you don't have deep capital markets. It's a technical thing. But every single meeting, one of the things we look at is the credit to deposit ratio. It says how much is the total loan book in Tamil Nadu compared to all the deposits made by the people of Tamil Nadu. It is continuously above 1, right? So 1.05, 1.10, 1.13, something 1.09, which means effectively that the banks are bringing money from outside Tamil Nadu into Tamil Nadu and lending it into Tamil Nadu, thereby helping accelerate the growth of Tamil Nadu, clearly. I had not contemplated the reverse, and Ratin's article points out that the credit to deposit ratio in Uttar Pradesh is 0.55, even though it's a much smaller base. 45 paise of every rupee that UP people deposit into the banks gets taken out of UP and used somewhere else. That's clearly a retardant to their own growth, right? Now, nobody sets this diktat, right? The bankers go where the credit is good. That's true if you look at, World Bank or ADB or KFW or JICA. Southern states get a lot more of these projects, and the union tried to do something. It was misguided. They stopped it, thankfully. It was a technical thing. But nobody is that powerful that you can control the economy or the market, right? The market has its own momentum, has its own logic, its own rationale. People are, sentient beings with their own preferences. So this is actually a great disservice. Whatever the model we have now, this model is a great disservice to those left behind. We should not contemplate all of North India as one block, or all of the Hindi people as one block, or all of the states as one block. Just because they happen to vote for a particular party doesn't make them that different than us, right? I mean, it's a different I think we need to separate the person, the party, the outcome in the election, and the actual lives and realities of the people. And if we look at it from the lives and realities of the people, we don't actually have that much conflict. We all want the same thing. We all want everybody to progress, everybody to participate. We can't say we're for social justice in our state, but then we want only our citizens to progress and not the people of UP or Bihar. We want everybody to progress. This political dialogue around one strong man, one all-knowing, all-person being is obscuring these things. We need to separate these issues. And if this is 5 or 10 or 15 years is a blink of an eye in the evolution of mankind. So at the core, if we go back to the real values, that is that we want everybody to do well, to have a stake, to do this, then we have to reimagine all these lists. And that's for all states, not just for our state. All states should have greater freedom. All states should be incentivized with the right kinds of variables to deliver the right outcomes. So I definitely think I'm not that visionary or that experienced to know what the fix exactly is, but I'm 100% sure that what we have now is not working, and we have to do something about it.
Your thoughts on the fix?
As Mr. KTR said, when it comes to the relevance and existence of various states in this country, in the parliament, that is non-negotiable. There's no way that anybody is going to negotiate or give in. Fundamentally, the various states in this country have been formed on the basis of linguistic basis. Now, there's no way that Kerala or Andhra or Tamil Nadu or Karnataka or Orissa or Bengal or Maharashtra or Gujarat, nobody will compromise their position when it comes to number of seats or the actual political presence. That is one thing. So that, I think, when the appropriate moment comes, it is quite natural that everybody will come together and not let anything happen where their existence itself will be in question.
I think we've covered a very important set of issues that get to the heart of what federalism is. Federalism as a principle of accommodation, of holding together our diversity and representing our diversity, of being a principle which is about deliberation that helps us get through these very difficult challenges of a lot of divergence amongst us as states, and a lot for us to learn from as states. And the only way out of that is through a lot more deliberation, a lot more dialogue, emerging from which perhaps some of the reforms or the answers for this new imagination of federalism would come, because ultimately we are all coming together, as Shashi, you said. We are a common nation working towards a common proposition, a common purpose. We can open it up, I think, now for a few questions. We have about 20 minutes, am I right? Yeah, for questions from the House.
Just a quick revision. Kindly introduce yourself and direct your question to the panelists that you would like an answer from. Thank you.
Great.
And please leave it to the moderator to choose the questions. I'm
well,
sure.
There are 3 women right here who are asking questions, and I have to give them the space first. So, ma'am, over to you. It's South first means ladies first. Did we not hear
It is.
about all the great women's empowerment?
So, good evening, dignitaries. Pleasure listening to all of you. I'm Anuradha Tota, and good evening especially to KTR Garu. The question is about national education policy. I represent Black Buck Engineers, which is into EdTech, but I'm very concerned about making the content same across the country, because each place is different. Each state has a different orientation. Somebody wants manufacturing, somebody wants management, somebody wants IT. So it is different across, this same content. They have included something related to localization, but it's just, you can teach the same content in local language. Language is only one part. The content also is different. So there is very little debate across related to NEP. And whenever I go to NEP discussions, it's all praises. But I feel actually concerned about it. So request KTR Garu to talk about this.
Well, I completely agree with you, because like it was pointed out, I think we need to start aligning our priorities with the kind of prevailing conditions that we have in our respective states. For instance, we just talked about NEET, the Common Entrance Examination. And in fact, Honorable Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu wrote to us. He has actually deputed a couple of members of parliament to us, and he had asked us if we should support their line of thought. But when we actually started digging into statistics, we realized that the students from Andhra and Telangana actually have been performing rather well in NEET. In fact, we've been the beneficiaries of NEET. So the point I'm trying to make is, each of us in our own states have different challenges with respect to what we want to set as targets in terms of our education curriculum as well. For instance, in the state of Telangana, our strengths are life sciences, information technology, and of course the areas where these two converge. We also have aerospace defense, logistics, textiles, etc., etc. So when I am designing my curriculum, I would rather have something where I play to my strengths, where I want my children, my local students actually gaining gainful employment in the industry that I'm actually trying to attract, rather than trying to study something which is completely unconnected or which is completely not known, not relevant rather to us. But of course, you also have to understand, then there are certain courses. For example, some of the students might be wanting to, possibly study space technology. While I might not have a space station in Telangana, I should still be able to offer it. So there are certain subjects, I think, which we have, there's a certain bandwidth that we have to leave out. Barring that, I think the state should again be given the opportunity to tailor-make, to literally, create a curriculum which goes very well with their, next couple of decades or next, agendas as far as industrialization is concerned. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sunita, and I don't represent any organization. I've just come here as a concerned citizen. And first of all, congratulations to the organizers for having sort of something like the South First. I mean, it's high time we moved away from Delhi-centric, media. That's one thing. And you could not have found a better panel than this to address this question. That's the thing. And then I'm throwing open this very provocative question to any of the panelists here, at the risk of sounding anti-national. Let us all agree that we are a humongous, heterogeneous, unwieldy, and difficult to govern country, violently yoked together. History tells us how we've been brought together. So all this talk of unity in diversity, essays which we've written since school, are we just romanticizing it? Or do you think that it is possible? Now, I've listened to arguments back and forth and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I've heard Mr. KTR and Mr. PTR say that, you're talking about decentralization coming in top-down. I've heard Mr. Bugana Rajendran Reddy saying that it should be bottom-up. Do you think it will be possible, top-down or bottom-up, somewhere we'll meet and it will be possible to have a proper government, state and central?
Well, I don't think it's particularly romanticizing the idea of India, because honestly, I do believe there's been a civilization impulse towards national unity going back thousands of years. I think that this is a magnificent experiment to bring together the diversities in one space. I used to love twitting the Europeans by telling them that we had achieved what the European Union can dream for 100 years of getting to, of different cultures, in a sense, in the Marxist sense, different national groups all converging together into one particular state and sharing a common experience. I think it's in many, many ways been wonderful. But my argument was that while this Indian unity is a great precious asset, we need to reimagine the way we've structured it so that, for example, we can decentralize our federalism, ideally right down to the panchayat level, and certainly to a great extent to the states, so that, for example, the proportion of resources of the central government is not so overwhelming and so decisive that the political authority of Delhi should not matter so much that, as KTR was saying, everybody has to stand in a queue in Delhi to get what is rightfully money they themselves have raised and spent back. There needs to be, on fiscal grounds, on political grounds, and everything else, a reimagining so that we can keep the unity, but at the same time protect and enable that diversity to also thrive. Right now, the danger is tilting in the balance more and more. I mean, there was a reference in the conversation, perhaps very briefly, to the cesses. The government has essentially started disguising more and more taxes as cesses in order not to have to share any states. So you're really seeing a situation where the state governments are being gradually disempowered both financially and politically. And we in the South, I do believe, are facing a disproportionate burden because a lot of the taxes we raise here are going off to the rest of the country. And as Mr. Reddy said, that's a good thing. We do need to help other poorer states to develop. But again, as PTR pointed out, are we doing it the right way? Because they don't seem to have progressed despite all these resources going to them. So somebody, I think at some point, maybe this should be a job for Niti Aayog in consultation with state governments, to sit down and reimagine how we can do this in a way that lets the states get on with the business of actually developing in their own interests and so on. Some of these issues of common examinations, common everything else, would be, I think, much less troubling if we had a clear distinction in our minds between the things that states do and states need to empower themselves for their own interests, and some things that can only be done nationally and for which you do need national criteria, national standards, and national resources. This is not impossible, but it needs people to focus on the question now.
It had been a very stimulating and hard-hitting dialogue. Thank you. I want to raise one issue which I think is very eminent and would have very significant implications for state finances.
Are you only talking to your political opponent, or are you talking to all of us?
To all of you.
No, in fact, to the finance ministers. Now, this is about the extra budgetary borrowing of the states for capital expenditure. Now, the demand of the central government is that this be considered part of the fiscal deficit or normal borrowing of the state governments. If they insist on it, I think Telangana, Andhra, Kerala, I don't know about Tamil Nadu, you are going to face disaster. Fiscal space for the coming few years is going to be totally erased. And this is not an issue that can be individually negotiated. It's something that requires collective action, legal and otherwise. Particularly when the central government, they have never complied with 3% fiscal deficit. Average has been 4+. While on the eve of COVID, state government fiscal deficit is only 2.75. So I would like the finance minister to respond whether you will be considering possibility of a collective resistance to this move.
I'm not a finance minister, but I'd like to respond to this.
Sorry, can I just
Yes.
make use of my role as moderator and just request one, because there's lots of hands, so can we just take 2 questions at a time? I think the lady there had a question as well, and then you can respond to both.
Sure.
Please. There, Mr. Isaac.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity. I'm Poonam Kaur, and this is a question for all of you, and asking just as a citizen. For a democracy to survive and thrive, we certainly need a strong opposition. Whereas we see in many states that they're enjoying the monopoly. And in this position, how do we really say that the center is unfair or the state is unfair? Nobody is really looking at democracy on the whole. Secondly, sir, this question was specially for you. Bugna sir, for you. We have heard a lot of arguments about the center being unfair to South, and there have been arguments where, there's a lot of difference the way they behave. And having the strength that you have, would you, looking at the situation in Andhra Pradesh, not really ask for special category status? Are we losing it out because of our political selfishness? KTR sir, first I would like to thank you, because on the 75 years of independence, when I went to Pochampally and I tweeted, you've actually released the pension for the weavers, and I really want to thank you for that. And I want to ask you, because you've been tweeting a lot about taxes, is it not true that state is also enjoying the taxes at the same time as the opportunity to abuse the center? Isn't it hypocrite? To you, sir, Dr. Tharoor. Sorry, last one. Dr. Tharoor, would you take the opportunity for a South Jodo Yatra so that the democracy survives? Thank you.
So, we'll start with you,
Well, I'll take Mr. Isaac's question first. You know, the Fiscal Responsibility Budgetary Management Act that was enacted in 2003 has clearly, outlasted its, intent is what I would like to believe. Because for a growing economy, which is growing at 7, 8, 9%, and for a state like Telangana, which has grown at a CAGR of 15% over the last 8 years, you cannot look at debt as a burden. In fact, if you ask me, for a growing state, debt is a future investment if you're investing in capital expenditure. If you're investing in productive sector, if you're investing in a sector which is going to actually pay you back, then it's actually an investment, it's actually not a debt, first thing. The second thing is, in fact, Mr. Isaac would agree, when in 2003 the act was enacted by the UPA, it was envisioned that even the center would actually comply. But in the last 18 years, they've flouted it, they've amended it at least 18 times. Now, you can't have two set of rules, for both governments. The central government, while it talks about, debt GDP, debt GSDP, they keep pointing to us that, you're overshooting. They're at 60%, a state like Telangana is at 25%, but we still get told that, you're not behaving. And the last thing I'll tell you, to penalize us, to choke us, to strangulate us, and to tell us that, listen, you're not in compliance, the SPVs that have been borrowing, the corporations that have been borrowing, to look at their debt burden and to actually put it on us, on the state, as covered under our FRBM, and to put it retrospectively is something that I will certainly challenge. I will definitely, work with Mr. Isaac. I would definitely go to the highest court in the country because it affects my state, it chokes my state, it chokes a growing state, and it's a travesty. So that's to Mr. Isaac's point. Now, Poonam, I thank you for supporting handlooms. You said we are hypocritical. I don't think we are at all because, we are a proud contributor to this nation. I'm proud that Telangana is a contributor. We are only 2.5% of India in terms of population, but we contribute to 5% of GDP. So अगर आज कोई bridge बन रहा है गुजरात में, महाराष्ट्र में, तमिलनाडु में या कहीं और, मुझे कोई उससे दिक्कत नहीं है, but मुझे इसी बात से फर्क पड़ता है, this cultural political hegemony कि हम देने वाले हैं, आप लेने वाले हैं, उस बात से मुझे फर्क पड़ता है, क्योंकि हम contribute कर रहे हैं, हम किसी के subservient नहीं है, किसी के subordinate नहीं है. तो इसीलिए मैं बस नहीं इतना ही कहता हूँ, अगर आप तेलंगाना आते हो दिल्ली से, आके थैंक्स बोल के जाओ, आके यहाँ बिरयानी खाओ, ईरानी चाय पियो, बहुत अच्छी चाय है हमारी, तो बस you please behave and behave in a respectable fashion. You cannot come here and tell us and dictate terms to it and basically tell us that we are not performing when we actually have done rather well. We have the largest per capita income in the country. When 2014 it was 1,24,000 rupees. Today it's 2,78,000 rupees. Our GSDP has risen by 130%. We have outperformed the union government on all benchmarks. So we have a right to decide our own priorities. In fact, I heard Tyaga said, speak in a TV where he has said, famously asked, in fact, he said, "Are you doing better than us that you actually dictate terms to us?" So the point is, we're not being hypocritical. All we are saying is we're happy to contribute to the nation. We're more patriotic than you, but at the same time, do not, kind of impose, do not kind of, try and come here and tell us what to do and what not to do. Let us decide our priorities. Let us chart our own course. That's all I'm saying.
Can I just add one point? Do you think a fiscal council where fiscal rules are determined in collaboration with the center and state can help resolve this challenge?
Maybe, but I just want to make a point here about this FRBM Act, right? So we have our own FRBM Act equivalents and we can amend them also. But the difference between us and the union government, once the union government amends its act, and it has done, as KTR said, 18 times and violated, that's the end of the story. For us, after we amend our act, we'll get these letters. All of us have got one of these letters. Then we get a second letter that says, you shall not borrow more than X rupees. You shall not borrow so much of it, more than so much of it in the market, etc., etc. So this hypocrisy of a double standard where you can do whatever you want, then you tell us that we can't do what the Constitution allows us to do, our Act allows us to do, you use this 293(3) backdoor clause and all that. So let me just put all of it together and say, we don't begrudge sending net donor money or being net not recipients. We don't have any lower concern for the average Indian citizen than anybody else. What we don't like, expanding on what KTR said, don't come and tell us as if you brought this money from your house and gave it to us. It's our money, you're giving it back to us. Some of it you're giving back to us, number one. Number two, either you perform better than us and then tell us how we should act, or you learn from us, or at least leave us alone to perform better than you rather than try to subvert our performance. Number three, if you want to take national policy and actually create things in areas where it's not your domain, right? Education was moved from the state list to the concurrent list. It did become union list. Agriculture is in the state list. Minor dams and ports are in the state list. Why are they legislating over there, and how have they involved any of us in it? See, it's one thing if you call all of us collectively and you say this is not working well, let's do it better, we are likely to get some progress, or at least we can agree to disagree and walk away. You enforce by diktat with no track record of performance and say, because I say so, you shall do so. So our friction is not about being donors, our friction is not about being less than caring citizens. Our friction is that we don't get treated as equal partners. That's what the Constitution says. It doesn't say there are two levels of government. It says there are two parallel, equal governments. And we get no acknowledgement for the good things we do, and in fact, we get told how to do it. Let me just take NEET as an example. What is our objection with NEET? Health is a subject where it's very hard to separate education from public health delivery, because you can't teach medicine without a hospital. And the government of Tamil Nadu, I would say better than most states, at least in ratio of doctors to patients and other health measures, has done better than almost any state in India. We have an integrated policy that goes all the way from medical colleges to government hospitals to rural health centers to primary health centers, where we incentivize doctors to go and work there so that they can get priority in education, etc. A test like NEET disrupts all of these designs. It's not just about the entrance, it's about the entire health delivery system. And then I ask the question, on what basis do you tell me that I should change my model when my model has produced far superior results than you and is 100% funded by my state budget? It's not your money. You haven't done better than us. Why should you tell us how we should run an admission test? We will give priority to SC and Dalits. We will give priority to rural students. We will give priority to state schools. That is our health system. It has produced phenomenal results and brilliant doctors all over the world. On what basis do you believe you know better than us? Why should we listen? It's not even your money, it's our money. It's not even a central grant. It's the state of Tamil Nadu allocated 20,000 crores in the budget to run the health system. So this is the attitude that we don't like. Otherwise, we're willing to play with anybody on anything. We're willing to participate, to discuss, to come out with better outcomes, right? Is this big brother or big daddy or, messiah complex that we have a problem with?
So the first question being Dr. Isaac's question, the fiscal issues. In fact, I completely agree with the rest on this. The reason being 60% of the expenditure normally is borne by the states, whereas 60% of the revenue goes to the center. So there's a whole lot of difference, and the responsibilities and the duties of the states are far more citizen oriented than the union. Union has certain responsibilities in the form of defense, certain infra that is common to all the states and to the country, etc. But something that is closer to the citizen is primarily the state's responsibility. Therefore, we cannot have two sets of rules. One borrowing rules for the states and one borrowing rules for the center. Whatever is there has to be common. The same FRBM rules applicable to both, the same conditions applicable to both. Because ultimately, if all the states contribute to a nation, all the citizens are Indians, then the debt of the country becomes the debt of the country, citizen. If the debt of a state is equally distributed to the citizens of the state, the debt of the country also becomes equally distributable to the citizens of the country. Therefore, here we have to be on common ground, them and us. And coming to Poonam's question about special category, it is actually a very solemn assurance and promise given to the state of Andhra Pradesh during the reorganization of the state. During the reorganization of the state, it is like almost after a long time, you send your manager away without even telling them why you are sending him away, And while sending him away, you tell him that, okay boss, I'm going to give you an apartment, and you don't give even that. This is what has happened. And at that point of time, the special category, whatever assurance was given, should have been implemented immediately. Normally what happens, Poonam, I don't know if you have traveled by train ever to Mumbai. You have? Okay, then, in case you travel by train, if you are on time, you reach Bombay Central on time. By any chance, if you are delayed in Kalyan, you wait till afternoon. You can never get there. So this is the same case. You should have got it in 2014. The then government should have fought and got it. Now it is like continuously fighting.
South Joro.
South Jodo Yatra. Look, I'm a supporter of the Bharat Jodo Yatra. But
You are?
I am. But having said that, the South is also a place of diversities. I mean, the fact is that there are different experiences, different cultures, different languages, different needs and different experiences amongst the various southern states. But what we have in common is worth concerting about, because there are some elements that in the national project, I believe the South can usefully concert their views on. And if you were to look at, for example, KTR suggested maybe the Southern Zonal Council or something could be a forum, or maybe a separate fit-for-purpose forum could be created just to discuss these issues. I think we will find that the southern states have a lot of common interests, even one of which happens to be ruled by the BJP, the Karnataka experience is not very different from what Andhra and Telangana and Kerala and Tamil Nadu are experiencing in terms of the distribution of resources, in terms of other considerations. And therefore, it seems to me, yes, that the South can get their act together, talk to each other constructively, but at the same time preserving the very diversity within the South that we want to preserve within India as a whole.
Southern diversity, I'm a half Tamil married to a Malayali. There's a lot of diversity, I can tell you. There's a question there. Yes. We'll take two questions. So from you here. I'll have to give privilege to this side now. So.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. KTR साहब से मेरा सवाल है. पहले तो मैं आपको थैंक्स करना चाहती हूँ. आप मेरे ट्विटर के कई ट्वीट्स पे आपने रिस्पॉन्ड किया. जो स्टेट इशू पे मैं बात करती हूँ, तो आपने रिस्पॉन्ड किया, बहुत अच्छा लगा. थैंक यू वेरी मच. मैं आपसे सवाल करना चाहती हूँ. आज ये बैठ के हम डिस्कस कर रहे हैं. अगर मन की बात जब आई थी, उस वक्त थी, उसको हम रिएक्ट करते. मन की बात सारे स्कूल के बच्चों को मन की बात बिठा, सारे स्टेट में बिठा दिए थे. अगर उस वक्त अगर रिस्पॉन्ड करते, उस वक्त तो कुछ सोचते, तो आज इस तरह की बातें करने की ज़रूरत नहीं पड़ती. क्योंकि मैं ये देख रही हूँ, भाग्यनगर बना दिया जाएगा, ये भी स्लोगन चल रहा है. और हम कहते हैं ये नहीं होगा, क्योंकि तेलंगाना गवर्नमेंट, TRS गवर्नमेंट ने इसको वो तरीके से अपोज किया, और मुझे यकीन है कि ऐसा नहीं होगा. लेकिन पेट्रोल पंप के पास देख रही हूँ बड़े 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 पोस्टर लगते हैं हमारे प्रधानमंत्री जी के. और जब आज आ रही थी, रूलिंग गवर्नमेंट के बड़े बड़े पोस्टर्स थे, तो उसके अपोजिट साइड में उनके भी बड़े बड़े पोस्टर्स उतने साइज में पड़े. तो मुझे डर लग रहा कि जैसा कि वैक्सीनेशन सर्टिफिकेट में मोदी जी के फोटो आ गई थी, कहीं बर्थ सर्टिफिकेट में आ जाएगा क्या? ऐसा कुछ मसला तो नहीं होगा क्या? मेरा ये कंसर्न है. थैंक यू.
Thank you.
Can we just take one more from here? Hanji. Yeah, we'll take all three.
Yeah. We are transgender persons, and the question is primarily to KTR sir as well as to the Minister sir from Andhra Pradesh. There are quite a few migrant transgender persons who have domicile now in Telangana, who have roots in Andhra Pradesh. I have two questions. One is that while their natal families are claiming their rations in Andhra Pradesh, they get no ration in Telangana. It's a process. I must also thank you, KTR Garu, for the Transgender Welfare Board. Some of us are there now. From the time I asked you the question 4 years ago at Bharat Anenenu, we've come some distance. Thank you for that. The second question is, again, this is a South issue. The state of Karnataka has thankfully given 1% reservation. I would exhort you all to give a little more than that if possible. Thank you.
Okay. In order to accommodate both questions, can you just keep them short? I know you've been waiting, sir. Yeah. No, this gentleman here, he's been waiting for some time. Can you just pass the mic to this gentleman here? He's been waiting for some time. Thank you. And then if you can just give him a mic too, so we can take both questions quickly.
Thank you, KTR Garu. So my name is Bhaskar Pinna from USA. Just I want to give one question to you. So the discrimination among the states, right? How can we overcome that? So one nation, one India. So the humanity is a religion. then how can we how can we take over to the India, like instead of this religion and religion politics? So humanity is a religion, right? So one India, one nation, one vote, then one humanity. How can we take over to the citizen of India instead of the religion politics day by day?
Thank you. Thank you. Your question.
Yeah. At the outset, I would like to compliment all the panelists for the quality of their discussions and the depth of their observations. I think it's very well rounded and very well put. Now, we're all Indians at heart. We want the country to do well. And unless we grow as an economy, there is no scope for us to deal with our internal challenges nor our external threats. So the focus has to be on economy, like all of you have rightly pointed out. Now, again, we are a young nation, young demography. I think at a certain level, there's a lot of pessimism creeping in because of the way things are going. The focus has to be brought back to the economy rather than ideologies and things like that. My question is, will you all, I mean, I see this great quality of leadership here, and I see this as the future of the states. And will you all collectively work for bringing the focus back onto the growth of the economy rather than things that are inconsequential right now?
Thank you. We've usually started the answers this way, so maybe we can start this way. And I think we're getting to the end of the session. So any last remarks you'd like to add to in response, please?
I'll start with Sri Pallamraj Gari question. Definitely. I think we're all mostly regional parties, states that were made on linguistic lines. And the people of our respective states have put utmost confidence and trust on us and elected our governments and our chief ministers. So definitely, I think we'll rise to the occasion.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, results matter. Our job as public servants is to improve people's lives. Some of that we can do directly through schemes or subsidies or programs. Some of that we can foster an environment where the economy grows and more opportunities are created. But we must all hold ourselves accountable to some concrete outcomes, and if we feel we're making progress, then that validates everything. You know, we all come with different philosophies into public life. What philosophy you come with is only relevant if at the end of the day you deliver an outcome. Then you say, I was able to deliver this outcome because I came with social justice or inclusion or, you know, participation or whatever it is. What worries me about the country, if I look at the last 8 years, the agglomeration of power in one or two sets of hands has kept on accelerating. And the outcomes, either in absolute numbers or in relative numbers to where we should have been had we been on a growth trajectory, have kept on going the wrong way. This is a dangerous, scenario anywhere. If you find that greater and greater political strength and institutional dominance and worse economic outcomes and lack of jobs and so forth. So I think what distinguishes us at this point today in the South is that we are bucking that trend. Our governments are delivering and we are improving people's lives, and therefore people elect us or re-elect us and give faith. This is the only sustainable model. If you cannot deliver results, sooner or later you're going to have to be held to account. It may take a long time. Large systems between cause and effect is a big gap, and it's hard to attribute which effect to which cause and all that. But at a macro level, there's not been any other sustained example in the world where things have kept on getting worse without some kind of correction. That's true in the markets, that's true in society, that's true in politics. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think really we should mark ourselves to market. What have we achieved? How many people's lives have gotten better? Is there a faster trajectory? Is there a better path? Those are the things we really should be bringing to the debate. And for the most part, I would say, at least in much of the South, until recently in Karnataka, those used to be the issues. Unfortunately, we are seeing now Karnataka slip a bit into all kinds of, other issues, which is not good for the people. And already we can see the economic kind of consequences, right? I'm sure that in Telangana, in Andhra, certainly in Tamil Nadu, we're seeing lots and lots of big companies start to say, should we keep all our eggs in one basket? Should we really be Karnataka or Bangalore-centric? Should we start trying to diversify out? It's not yet become a, exit, but it's certainly becoming a, should I invest any more in this society where things are not stable? So that's the future of any society, right? Is people's lives getting better. That's what we're all here for. And certainly I think we focus on that every day, and we'll continue to focus on that every day. It's ironic that when you had coalition governments and people who were considered weak, you actually saw huge progress in the country. And now you have this single-party government, and people who are considered, or individuals are considered, strong men, and outcomes are getting worse and worse. It tells you something about why democracy with a lot of debate and a lot of participation and a lot of voices and a lot of, dissent is actually a good thing. It yields better outcomes than the perception of, some, superhuman force, shall I say.
Well, I think at the beginning of our conversation, the fear was expressed that some of the sentiments we're going to discuss might be seen as anti-national. I think it's worth stressing that I think everybody here in this panel is a nationalist. We are interested in seeing India prosper and thrive, but India is made up of all of us, is made up of all the states, is made up of all the people of this country. And clearly, when I talk about reimagining federalism, it's about achieving a more constructive balance between center, states, and indeed panchayats, so that we could actually have a win-win proposition for all. The idea should be, and should clearly be, that we want India to thrive. That means that everybody must feel they have a common stake in outcomes, and that those outcomes are sometimes better delivered at the lowest possible level, and in some cases can only be delivered at the national level. And I think until that's clearly understood, we're going to have the kinds of problems that particularly the three state ministers have so clearly identified in their comments today. And I would simply urge all of us to understand that being proud of our nation requires us to have the imagination also to see the challenges being faced in the way in which the nation is being run. That's really all I want to say. I think I really do want to renew my congratulations to the organizers for having got these voices and minds together today, because I do believe that it's time the southern states and southern intellectuals, thinkers, writers started talking much more to each other about how we can imagine our place in an India which is changing in quite dramatic ways in the last few years, changing towards a conception of India that perhaps we don't share in quite the same way in these southern states. And we need to think about how we fit in and how they should fit in with us in order to make the collective India work that much better.
Thank you. A lot of times when I criticize the union government, when I criticize the Honorable Prime Minister, let me put it on record and let me say this. Every patriot in any country, would love his country all the time, would support his country and stand by it all the time. But I would only support my government when it actually deserves it. I would support the country 365 days, 24/7. But I would only support the government when it actually deserves it on issues. Otherwise, we don't. That's exactly the mantra we've followed over the last 8 years. We have supported this government in GST, on GST. We have supported them on numerous bills. It's not like, we oppose everything for the sake of opposing. But the fact is, in the world's largest democracy, if you do not open up and talk about real issues, Pallam Raju Garu spoke about economy. I think that's paramount. Now, for a growing country with large population, 140 crore people, unless we get our economics right, unless we ensure that the economy is on track and it is not derailed because of our myopic policies, we are going to hurt the long-term interest of this nation. So it is our bounden responsibility in a vibrant democracy, going back to Madam's question as well, कि हमें डर लगता है कि ये होगा, वो होगा, society में anarchy आ जाएगी. I'll only tell you one thing. I think a vibrant democracy needs a vibrant opposition. A vibrant democracy needs a vibrant opposition. So unless we question, unless we ask, unless we point out to the flaws, unless I tell you that in 8 years, You know, what have we seen, you know, from the strongmen who have been running this country? Highest inflation in 45 years. Highest unemployment in 30 years. Highest value, devalued rupee, 80 rupees, you know. There were lots of murmurs around 60 when it was 60 in Dr. Manmohan Singh's time. Now today it is at 80. We have the highest number of poor people in the world after COVID. We have just recently surpassed Nigeria. And unless we talk about it, unless we debate these issues, attention would be constantly diverted to nonsensical issues. And those nonsensical issues are about, getting the attention on halals, hijabs, and all other things which are actually redundant and nonsensical in the context of our larger country, larger interests of this country. So I absolutely agree, sir. Our single-minded focus over the last 8 years in the state of Telangana has been to improve our economy. Our economic fundamentals are strong. We're focused on basics. Therefore, today our GSDP, like I was pointing out, has risen from 5,06,000 crores to 11.55 lakh crores. Our per capita has risen from 1,24,000 rupees to 2,78,000 rupees, which is one of the highest in the country for a large state. Our